let's get started. So Leslie, just, if you recognize the name, let them in. If it's a phone number, let them in. We can just ask who they are if we're not sure who they are. But otherwise, welcome to micro-learning on safety culture. And this one is the first of three. This one is focused on the use of huddles at the time of removals. So if that's what you're looking for, you're in the right Zoom room. Sound good? So I'm going to do a screen share because if you know me, you know that I organize myself with PowerPoint, for better or for worse. So let me share this and let me make it full screen. Okay, so that's me. I'm Pete Cudney. If you don't know me, I'm with the Child Welfare Training Partnership, and I'm connected with the Barrie office and the St. Johnsbury office and the St. Albans office, and used to be connected with the Morrisville office as well. I miss them dearly, but they're with Krista now, so that's fabulous. And so we're going to record this. That's a good reminder that I should record right now. Where's my button for record more? So just be aware of that. Oh, are we already recording? Looks like we're already recording. Leslie, did you set that up for me? Or did I have that going automatically?
I cannot claim, nope, not me.
Okay. So we've been recording since I was bantering in the beginning. So we've got my joke and everything else that goes with that. So here's the agenda. We have an hour, right? So this first stuff, the safety culture review, I'll try to be as fast paced as I can with it. I just don't want to assume that everyone remembers that or has heard that information. And that's kind of the background for like, why does this practice even exist? Why are we even considering this? So then we'll talk a little bit about what these huddles look like, and we'll have some breakout discussion there. When we do the breakout rooms, unless it's absolutely impossible for you, please turn your camera on, turn your microphone on, because I'll kind of figure out the breakout rooms based on the number of people. And if half of the people don't actually participate, then that's a really, really difficult situation for the other folks in the breakout rooms. And so we'll do one breakout discussion in the middle and then one toward the end. And then I'll give you the information for like a satisfaction survey link. So this is the basic flow that we're going to go through. So let me launch this poll. The first thing I wanted to know is who's using these already and who's not using these. These are not mandated. So it's honestly fine if you're not using them. So let me just find how I do that. I think I have to stop my share here and launch a poll. All right, so once you can see that, go ahead and answer those questions, and then I'll show the results to everyone. Okay. I don't have 100% of people's answers in yet, but pretty close. I'll give it one more minute.
That might be related to the last people I just let in, Pete.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah, they may not be able to see the poll if I launched it before they came in. Okay. So let me end this and share results. Okay. So first question, looks like a little bit more than half of folks on this call have been a part of huddles for removals in their office. So if you haven't yet, you're in good company. Don't worry about it. You'll learn more today. And if you have, then there'll be times where I'm asking for people to talk about what's going well with them, what's not going well with them, like how are they difficult? One of the things about safety culture is the idea that it's really important to talk about both what's going well and also what's not going well, so we can learn from that so we can improve. And so I really want to hear about that. Second question, of folks who have been in them, folks have found them very helpful or somewhat helpful. No one chose the more, didn't find them helpful or actually created additional work. So that's good news. And have you been a part of other meetings that are called huddles in your district? So some folks said yes. So the reason I asked that is just around language clarity. And so we can talk more about that as we go on. Okay, let me stop that. End that and go back to a screen share of this. Okay. Okay, so I'm going to talk really quickly and briefly about safety science and safety culture just to set the framework. So safety science literally is the application of science to questions of how do organizations that need to maintain safety, how do they do that? And it began after the Chernobyl meltdown. And the nuclear industry organized themselves and they started to study both in nuclear industry, both mechanical systems and also human systems to try to determine how they could ensure safety. And then it spread from the nuclear industry to other industries. You're probably most familiar with it in the aviation industry. And so where that shows up in the aviation industry is, for example, pilots, whether it's their first flight, their 100th flight, their 1000th flight, pilots in the cockpit, they have a pre-flight checklist, right? So the use of a checklist to ensure that we don't forget anything that's essential is an example of safety culture. There's the pre-flight safety briefing, right? Where you're reminded about where the exits are and you're reminded that an oxygen mask will drop down in the event of, you all know what goes there, right? Loss of cabin pressure, right? So the pre-flight safety briefing is an example of safety culture. It's, even though it's monotonous and you hate it and you open a magazine and you try to ignore it, you should listen to it. It's what they've learned is that if we do this every single time, we have better outcomes. People actually remember that underneath the seat is where the life jacket is, right? Or they remember how to put the mask on. And then the idea that the airplane mechanically knows when there is a loss of cabin pressure and immediately puts the darn thing in front of your face so that all you have to do when your oxygen level is low and you can't think clearly, you wouldn't be able to like get the oxygen mask out. You're about to pass out, right? So the darn thing drops in front of your face and you just have to cooperate enough to put it on and breathe. And so those are 3 examples of where they've engineered into the system responses at points where they know from their previous airline experience, aviation experience, they know that these are particularly sensitive or dangerous points in our work. And so let's design a response that isn't up to the individual. It's not you were on a flight 3 years ago and you remember where the exits are. It's we're gonna tell you again. And so the organization owns responsibility for it. And then the individuals involved have to follow the processes and practices in order to get the safety outcomes. Another place where it's been used a lot is in the healthcare industry, and it's being transferred now to Child Protective Services. I want to talk about hand washing just as one more example. So in the healthcare industry, you've heard this example if you've heard me talk about it before, where they did studies of post-operative levels of bacterial infections, and they were far too high. And so what they determined was that if we all simply wash our hands, every nurse, orderly, doctor, wash our hands before the procedures, then those numbers will go down. So they instituted a new policy, wash your hands. But then the numbers didn't necessarily go down right away. So then they started to pay attention to the culture in different hospitals, the culture in different emergency operating rooms. And what they found was that there's a cultural element to whether this works or not. In those hospitals and emergency rooms where there was a culture where people talked openly about mistakes that they made, where people were comfortable, where it was psychologically safe to remind the doctor who made so much more money than everyone else and had a lot of power organizationally, when there was a culture where the nurse or the orderly was comfortable saying, Dr. Cudney, you failed to wash your hands. You need to go back and wash your hands without fear of reprisal, that they wouldn't be in trouble professionally for that. In those hospitals, the numbers of infections did go down because it took a culture of everyone holding one another accountable, that safety is of paramount importance in order for the hand washing to really become a habit. So safety science has informed safety culture, and safety culture is new to child protection. And I think we're all in agreement. This is a field where we deal with high risk, high consequence decision-making. we need to be high reliability organizations, right? We need to be able to rely that our outcomes are going to keep children safe. Also, it's a really stressful and tiring field to be in. I can't see all your faces, but raise your hand if you would agree that there's some stress and fatigue involved in your work at times. And what we know from neuroscience, not safety science necessarily, is that when we're tired, we don't make great decisions. When we're under stress, we don't make great decisions. And so when you combine high risk, high consequence decision making, the need to be a high reliability organization, and the fact that we're too frequently operating under stress, that offers the rationale for why we need to design organizationally into our system responses that help you as individuals ensure safe outcomes. So you've seen this graphic before, I'm sure. The other reason that we need safety culture is for your long-term health, right? You're in a field where you are exposed to what I would say is serious temporary stress responses. And the difference to me about whether you get sick over time because that stress is toxic, or whether you're able to stay healthy and live a balanced life and enjoy your family and friends, but stay in this work because it's tolerable. The biggest difference to me is the presence of supportive relationships. And so I'm mentioning that now because a huddle is one example of a team level response that brings a team together instead of one individual having to deal with the stress of decision making and the stress of enacting a removal. It brings a whole team together to provide those buffering supportive relationships. So one reason that we want to consider using something like huddles at a point of removal is for your long-term health and benefit. And then the other reason is this concept that we just talked about of state-dependent functioning. So state-dependent functioning is the idea that when we're calm, like right now, we can be in a state where we're not worried about any physical threats to our safety, and we feel relationally safe with the other people that we're with. When we're calm enough like that, we can use our cortex, the green in the image here of this human brain, our thinking cap, and in the hand model for the brain, it's the fingers. We can use our cortex to think through situations. But if you've just received a custody order from court and you're in a state of stress, there's no way that you can do your best thinking, your best planning. You may still make it through that with safe outcomes, but you're going to do better if you bring another group of people together in a way that helps you to feel less stressed, and in a way where even if you are stressed, there are other people in the discussion who are operating from a place where they're more regulated and they can think a little bit more clearly. So that's the idea of state-dependent functioning. It's a natural adaptive response to stress. If there's a fire, we don't want to be thinking, we want to be acting and getting out of the building. And the pattern is that as stress increases, our ability to think before we react decreases. More stress equals more reactivity. So regulation is essential to decisions and actions that are safe. So safety culture is kind of organized into these different domains. So huddles at the point of removal are one good example of planning ahead for an event in our work. There are a lot of other pauses that are already built in. So if you've ever been a part of a staff safety consult where you're meeting with Shannon Morton or other folks from central office in order to make sure that you're kept safe. If you've ever been a part of a mandatory consult on cases that involve serious physical injury, then those are examples of pauses to plan ahead so that we can regulate together and think best. So these are the domains of safety culture. Huddles are clearly about, for removals, are clearly about planning ahead. They're hopefully also going to offer the primary assigned worker some emotional regulation. I'm not in this alone. I have a whole team of people. In fact, they didn't just help me think about what to do. They're carrying out half of the tasks for me. Okay, I can do this, right? Emotional regulation. Huddles hopefully are really targeted toward what are the action steps that we need to accomplish in the next hour or 2 hours so that it's really effective communication, that it doesn't drift into other directions. Huddles themselves for removals don't include reflecting back and testing change, but they can very easily if at the end, after you huddle and enact a removal, if either that day or the following day, if there's a quick 3 W's, how did the huddle go? Then in that process, you're reflecting back to learn more. And if you take the information from those 3 W's and bring it back to your leadership team and your all staff team to say, here were the things we did that really helped. Here's what we tried that were problems. Let's tweak these and improve it. And then the next time we run a huddle, let's see how it goes. Now you're also testing change. So this primarily functions as these top 3, and then you can add these other components with a simple 3 W's and kind of feed it back into the system. So let me pause there, and I'm going to walk through this flow chart, but I want anyone in the call to unmute yourself and let me know if you have a question or a comment about anything I've said so far. Seems like we're good. Yeah. Okay. I'm going to keep going then. All right. So here's kind of the flow chart. So you can see the huddles down here in green, right? So the way this is going to play out is that there's going to be for a time where we're filing an affidavit to request custody. A worker and a supervisor are going to consult together. They're going to have discussed the need for the affidavit probably long before. And what's really important for the huddles for removals is that we're not leaving the decision around placement until the time of the huddle for a removal. You certainly might huddle as a team to figure out a placement option for a child. But if that's left until the huddle for removal, it becomes very distracting itself. And so ideally, there would be a determination of placement options beforehand. And you might consider when we huddle up, if we get our court order, who else might we need to include? Do we need to include the district director? Are we near the end of the day on a Friday? And so we should talk to emergency services because this is going to potentially wrap over into the evening or the weekend. Is there domestic violence present? Should we pull in our domestic violence specialist, et cetera? So you might want to decide that ahead of time. Then at the time the affidavit is filed, the worker notifies other members of their team and within the district and other partners that were identified in step 1 that we're asking and we may receive a custody order. And in anticipation of that, we're gonna plan ahead that we're gonna have a huddle when we get that order. If you know when you're likely to get the order, you might include that. So that could be an email or a text message that gets sent out to folks. Then at the time that the court order is issued, then the worker sends out okay, we have the court order, we're going to huddle, here's the meeting link, we'll meet in 15 minutes, we'll meet in a half hour, whatever it is. Again, if this is an emergency care order, custody order, then it's important before the huddle happens to figure out the placement ahead of time. Then the huddle itself happens. We'll talk more in detail about that. The huddle is very focused on tasks. It should be brief. It should be facilitated. So someone is saying, I'll facilitate it, I'll lead the conversation, right? SBAR, we'll talk more about it. SBAR can be used to structure the conversation so that you stay on track, so that you're efficient. It's really critical. Some districts have discovered when they didn't have a decision maker present. So someone with organizational authority, typically a supervisor, really needs to be present. If it's a group of all family service workers huddling and it's unclear what decision to go in, then not having a supervisor or a district director present to make those decisions has proven problematic. During the huddle itself, 2 different checklists can be utilized, and we'll talk more about those. And then ideally, there's someone who is, in addition to someone facilitating, there's someone else who is taking notes about what was decided, who's going to do what tasks, and then those notes get shared out with everyone so that there's clear tracking and accountability in case later on anyone loses track of what was talked about in the conversation. Then the removal actions are taken. And I want to pause at this point to say, I think it goes without saying for everyone on this call, but obviously all of our efforts are first oriented toward keeping the child with the family. And so we're not suggesting huddles for removals to make removals easier by any means. They're going to be serious endeavors every time. But there's going to be a vigilant focus throughout that process on the physical and psychological safety for everyone. This is in keeping with safety culture. And then once each of the individuals have carried out their tasks, it's important that they relay that information back. And we'll want to hear from folks who have been using huddles in their districts a little bit more. You'll want to decide yourselves how we relay that information back. It may be to the supervisor. It may be to the whole team. It may be to emergency services if it's kind of wrapping over to them. And then at that point or the next day, you could consider debriefing about how that huddle went. That's going to be particularly important in the beginning, anytime districts are trying these practices out for the first few times. It's going to be really important to evaluate how they went. What do we need to do to tweak it a little bit differently next time? So to summarize, the supervisor and the worker consult ahead of time about the affidavit and about placement options. At the time the affidavit is filed, the worker says to the team, hey, we're anticipating we may have a removal order, we may need a huddle. At the time that the court order, the custody order comes out, then the email is sent out with a meeting link and a specific time. Please join if you can. The huddle is enacted, the removal is enacted, everyone relays back information typically to the supervisor. Okay, so continuing on.
Hey, Pete, there've been a couple comments in the chat.
Great.
I don't know if you want to
note
those.
Could you read some of those out to me, or should I read those?
No, I can.
Yeah.
Jessica from St. J says that they've implemented huddles to transition cases from front end to ongoing.
Okay.
Children have come into custody to divvy up the tasks moving forward and ensure ongoing worker has as much information as possible.
Nice.
And Lisa says they've done, the few that they've done have been around filing and not the removal.
Okay.
We started this in an effort to ensure that the worker writing the affidavit has the time to focus on writing the affidavit and completing early in the day so that we're not running into the after hours procedure for filing.
Excellent.
And the huddle focus is so they can notify the SA office. Was that Social Security office that the affidavit is? No. What's the SA office?
State's attorney.
Oh, State's attorney. Yes. Sorry. It's Friday. State's attorney's office so that the affidavit is coming and provide demographics for the petition, potential foster care placements, potential family placement, etc.
Awesome. Keep this up. So if you have tips, if you have things you guys have learned the hard way or whatever, keep it up, put them in the chat, because I can download the chat afterward and I can share that out with folks if that would be helpful. That's really nice. In terms of language, I think we're going to use the term huddles to mean different things at different times. Just to be clear about how I'm using the language, I think of a consult, a staffing, and a huddle. Those are the kind of the three domains that I have in my mind. In my mind, a huddle is going to be short and very focused, like 10 to 15 minutes is going to be a huddle. If it's a longer discussion in my mind around, so for example, I believe that in St. Johnsbury up in JDO, they sometimes meet to talk about family finding. And I would imagine that's more like an hour discussion. And so I would see that if it's a longer conversation with your staff in your district, I'm calling those staffing conversations. And then the consults are when we're talking to one of our specialists, right? So we're talking to a domestic violence specialist, or we need to talk to Shannon about a staff safety issue. When there's one particular person who's a specialist, I'm thinking of those as consults. And the reason that may be important in the long run is if we want to measure the effectiveness of different tools that we use, if we're all using huddles to mean lots of different things, then I think that'll be really tricky to evaluate it later. So use whatever language you want in your districts, obviously, but I'm thinking of huddles as short, task-oriented kind of organizing meetings. So that's what I was just saying. So a huddle is going to be focused and short, no more than 15 minutes, ideally. The guidance that we got from Mike Cull before we were all remote was, in your office, do it standing up. That's an emotional regulation strategy. When you stand up, your body is and your brain are much more organized for action, for let's go. You're much more likely to be focused and keep the conversation short. I've actually heard some feedback that since we've been doing huddles remotely and people are sitting like we all are, the huddles tend to drift more. They tend to be longer. The facilitator needs to pause people and say, let's stay on task a little bit more. So I would encourage you to do your huddles remotely standing up. It's just as easy, but you decide, okay? It's really important that you begin on time and end on time. If people are trying these huddles out and they're not sure about it, and the huddles drag on for 20 minutes, a half hour, 40 minutes, the number of people who agree to jump on the next huddle will dwindle very, very quickly. If it's not your case and someone's asking for you to give up 10 or 15 minutes, that's one thing. But if it's a half hour, 45 minutes, people aren't going to show up anymore. So you really need to keep it focused. Everyone should bring that kind of can-do energy. Let's do this. We're a team. Let's go. At the beginning, decide who's going to be the facilitator and who's going to be the note taker. And that shouldn't be the primary assigned family service worker. They've got enough to deal with during the meeting. And then here's the SBAR framework. So this stands for situation, background, assessment, and recommendation. And it's just a very simple structure for a lot of different kinds of conversations. So the facilitator can say, all right, I'm facilitating. Colton, tell us what the situation is. Colton says, all right, well, we just received this custody order. And then the facilitator says, tell us more about the family. Not everything, just what do we need to know for this removal? And so then we're going to hear about who's in the home, who are the children, what ages are the children, is there any history of concerning safety issues with this family that we need to know about? Based on the ages of the children, what do we need to be talking with them about, gathering for them, right? Those kinds of things. Then the assessment is, all right, well, if we have all of these tasks, who's the best match for them? Some people will have established relationships with family, others won't. So you'll want to, some people will have unique skill sets, other people will have skills in different areas. So you match up, but that's fairly quick. If there are disagreements there, default to the decider, right? The supervisor, if they're present, the district director, if they're present. Don't waste too much time kind of hemming and hawing, just make a decision. And then the recommendation is that list of tasks that are assigned. It takes a little while at first to get familiar with this framework, but once you're familiar with it, it allows for a really fluid conversation. Everyone knows kind of how the conversation flows that way. So let's take a look at an example video. You may have seen this before. So this is Alex and Shab and Kara and Jen from St. Albans. And they made this last year, way before COVID, when many of us were at Killington for 2 days, and they were putting on a workshop on huddles. And they made this video in their hotel room there at Killington. So it's just a role play. But let's watch and listen to this example.
Go.
Hey guys, hi. So we are gonna huddle to make a plan for removal. We just got an emergency care order for 2 kiddos, 2 and 4, who are currently with their mom. She's staying temporarily at a local motel, the Cadillac in St. Albans. So we need to make a plan for how we're gonna get these kiddos out of the home and into their foster placement. Okay, so intake worker, you wrote the affidavit. Yep. CPS worker, you're on call. You guys are going to partner to go do this.
Yes.
Awesome. So we want to figure out who is going to contact police for assistance from law enforcement.
I could do that. I could give them a call.
Great. Yeah. And then, so when you guys get there, we want to make a plan for like who's going to talk to mom, serve her the paperwork, who's going to be able to focus on the kids, getting them in the car, getting their belongings, things like that. Do you guys have an idea of how you want to split that up?
I mean, I have a pretty good relationship with mom, and so I feel comfortable talking to her about the kids being removed. And
great. So if you're gonna take mom, I'll focus on the kids.
Okay.
Jen, maybe you're new, you're shadowing, maybe you can assist Alex with getting the kids their belongings.
Yes, I can do that.
Great. The 2-year-old is probably gonna need diapers, wipes, things like that. Mom may or may not be willing to provide those things.
Right.
So you can just figure that out. And then once you guys have the kiddos.
How about if we get a voucher, like, just in case?
Great idea.
Okay.
I can write you guys some vouchers for the foster placement. Once you guys have the kiddos, you're gonna wanna take them to the foster placement. A few things you wanna do before you leave. You wanna take pictures of the kids. Make sure you give the foster parents the placement checklist.
Yeah.
Okay.
I'll make sure we have car seats and stuff like that.
Prep the fleet cars, that's great. Would you be willing to drive?
Sure.
Great,
Yeah.
so you can drive.
I mean, I've got to do this for my foundations checklist.
Sure.
Foundations checklist.
I'll send an email to the school and the service providers.
About who's gonna get them to daycare and
And
preschool
just
the
to
next
let
day.
them know about custody.
Sounds great. And then
Okay.
when you guys are done, be sure to call ESP, update them that the kids have been placed.
And that we're
And you're
home safely.
on your way home safely.
Okay.
Yes. Sounds
Perfect.
good.
All right,
Okay,
thank
great
you.
job, guys.
All right.
Excellent. Thank you, ADO folks. I always love watching that video. So I'll talk a little bit more about Huddles, and then we'll have a breakout room for you guys to talk with each other, and then we'll come back as a whole group.
Go.
Hey guys.
That's not what I wanted.
Go.
Bus forward. There we go. So other key pieces that we're learning as we go. So I want to pause. I want to say this is new work across the country, safety culture and child protection. Vermont's out in front. And so by no means does anyone in Vermont have this fully figured out yet. So if you haven't done a single one of these in your district, you're not too far behind. And even those districts that have been doing it for a while continue to learn and improve based on that. So one of the things that we've learned is that using your district removal checklist, and if you don't have one, there's examples that you guys can build from, as well as the DCF, FSD, and law enforcement checklist, which is a recent checklist that Shannon Morton created for us. So I can show you where to find those on SharePoint. But using those checklists during the huddle really offers this almost all the structure that you need around what decisions need to be made. We talked about having a decision maker present. When other good topics come up in the middle of the huddle, but those topics are not related to the task at hand of organizing for the removal, the facilitator should bookmark those. In other words, acknowledge, that sounds really important. I'm gonna note it here on our notes. We really shouldn't get sidetracked by that right now, so let's come back to that at a later time. So acknowledge the importance of it, and take a note of it, and then redirect everyone back on track as a facilitator. That'll happen, it'll definitely happen. Take your clear notes and share notes with all. I don't know if this is the practice or not. This is what we've talked about in the safety culture work group. And remind everyone to close the loop at the end. And then if you want to do a huddle, these are the questions that, a debrief afterward. These are the questions we would recommend. On the process level, did the huddle itself work as expected? Did it meet our needs? What else would we want to change for next time? On the clinical level, so the child and family needs, did we cover everything? Is there anything that still needs to be done? And if so, what's next? And then how are you? We know that family service workers pretty consistently report that one of those kind of flashbulb moments that we have a hard time letting go of in terms of the trauma that we may carry from the work is the process of needing to remove children from their home, that is potent. It's traumatic for people involved. And so it matters to check in. How are you doing? How did things go? Now's the time when we can ask, do you want to talk with anyone on the HOPE team? Is there anything else that you might need to take care of yourself? So if you do a debrief, we suggest you cover those different levels. So at this point, Leslie, is there anything in the chat that has been added that you want to update us on?
Just Shannon wanted to make sure that credit was given where credit is due for that law enforcement checklist. It was BDO who worked with the local PD to develop that.
Thank you for clarifying that, Shannon. I appreciate that. Okay, so in breakout rooms, and I may give you a full 10 minutes, I might make it a little shorter than that, but what questions, if any, do you have about huddles at this point? What concerns do you have about huddles? So you've experienced them and you have concerns, or you haven't experienced them yet and you're just worried about these things. And then if you've experienced a huddle, what do you like about them? And if you haven't yet, based on what you've heard today, what do you like about them? Would it be helpful for me to put those in the chat? Let's see, I can do that pretty quick.
Can I just add something? Sorry.
Please.
I just wanted to put it out there. I think there's, you had mentioned that it's important to have a decision maker. I also think that even if you're not in the family services role, you're in another role, maybe a case aide or, you know, an administrative role. Everybody has a role when you attend a huddle. So I think people, no matter what your role is, you could come to a huddle. We'll find something for you to do.
Thank you, Deb. That's great. So I put those questions in the chat. I'm going to create breakout rooms, and you'll get a little 60-second countdown before it ends. I know it's always abrupt. My apologies. We'll come back, and when we come back, then Deb's going to share a little bit more, as maybe will a couple other folks from Barry, because I asked them to. And they'll share a little bit more about what their experience of huddles are. And then if you had questions or concerns from your breakout room, then that'll be a time for us to open that up more, just discussion with everyone. Sound good? All right, so breakout rooms, here we go. Let's
pause the recording while you do that.
Sure.
I'm going to invite other people who have had experience, especially those family services workers, to talk about their experience. I think you know who you are. I will say your names if I have
Yeah,
to.
call them by name, Deb.
I'm going to. Krista, Jacob, Jamie.
I can share.
Thanks.
I shared this in the breakout group I was in. You know, I remember removals prior to the huddles. And now that we have this practice in Barry, I can even imagine what it would be like to go back to that without the huddles. I think as a worker, there's a lot of, you nailed it on the head, Pete, when you said there's a lot of stress and anxiety that comes with removal that kind of stands out in your work as far as like those trigger moments. And I think the huddle helps that, like not having to worry all about the paperwork or worry about different tasks because your team is sharing that with you. It also allows the person who is going to focus on the child to really help that child emotionally and physically integrate into their new placement without worrying about all the tasks that you have to do outside of that, because you've created an understanding with your team that someone's got that. And I think that as anything with COVID, there's been some challenges and some hurdles that we've had to overcome, but I also think that as it becomes practice, it's really easy to identify ways to continue that support and communication with each other.
Thank you, Chris. Awesome. Jamie?
I just wanted to add another piece to that is around, you know, when we're doing removals, it's one of the most traumatizing things for the children, but it also is for us, the workers. And a piece that we've kind of, you know, added to our removal huddle checklist is who's going to check in with those workers after the removal has been completed. And, you know, it's another way to address our safety culture and making sure that not only is the child being well taken care of during that traumatic event, but that our workers are being taken care of as well. And so I definitely encourage all the districts, if you're using a checklist of some kind, that maybe that would be beneficial as well, to make sure that we're connecting. And if there's nobody in the office that's available, there's always the IES that can be, you know, included in that circle back to the worker after the removal.
Excellent. So I'm looking at the time and I'm thinking, let's stay just with discussion for the rest of the time that we have. There's some other things that I was going to show you, resources on SharePoint. I just want you to know these removal checklists as well as guidance for how to do huddles is on SharePoint, but let's stay with this. So Todd asked a good question. So Todd asked, how are huddle teams determined? Deb said we send a district-wide email out in the chat. I have a question. Have there been times where someone has said, hey, we need a huddle, and then people haven't come, either they weren't available or it just hadn't caught fire yet. And how have you talked as a district about, like, when is it okay to say, well, I know you need a huddle, but I've got my own thing going. Like, when is it okay to not make yourself available for a huddle? Have you talked about that in Barry as a district? How has that managed?
We've talked a bit about it. Sorry, Deb, I saw you lean forward. I wanted to highlight a couple things that we've also done to enhance that practice and get more people to the table, because I don't know why it happens. We might be seeing this is going to be an emergency and we're talking about it at 8 o'clock in the morning, but then somehow it gets to be 3 o'clock and we're filing right then. I don't know what it is. It's something about the afternoons and usually on a Friday, right? So we have had a couple times when huddles have been called, and whether it's our big leadership meeting, and so leadership hasn't been able to be there, and that's been definitely a challenge. Generally, our family services worker, especially as this practice has continued, there's a lot of buy-in. I think people see how it could be really easy to just call the pediatrician to let them know, but that little task has benefited their colleagues so much. A couple things that we've tried to do to avoid some of the after hours scramble or close to after hours scramble is doing almost a planning huddle that we know that we're going to be requesting custody for an emergency, or we know we have this temporary care hearing where children may come in, and we do it in advance. So it's when the court order comes in, who's going to notify this who, and then the chain kind of starts. And I found that to be a bit valuable, even though sometimes we've done a bunch of planning and didn't get the order. But it's been really helpful to increase attendance and participation. I think just from the practice of it, people are really valuing it, and I think it shows connectedness with our colleagues.
Yeah, I think my sense is that one of the biggest things beyond that huddle itself going smooth, or that removal going smoothly, is it builds this professional intimacy, you called it, Deb, this trust, this sense that as a team, I can count on you guys and you can count on me, which goes so much farther than just the removal. So what are other questions or concerns from any of the breakout room discussions that you'd like to just put out there to everyone?
One thing that we talked about is really bringing the checklist to the huddle, like really making sure that because that can serve as a framework and a guidance, and also so you don't have to remember everything that was discussed, right? If you take notes and you jot down who's going to do what afterward, it just allows for things to move a little bit more quickly. And so really making that a part of the practice.
Excellent. While we keep talking, let me also show you the SharePoint, but keep bringing questions. So this is familiar to folks, I think. Here's safety culture resources. And here's Huddles information right here. So this is these are two of the district specific checklists. This is guidance on the whole process. So this kind of walks you through what huddles are and how you do them. So this is available in there. And then the BDO sponsored checklist to link up with law enforcement helps you walk through what you and the law enforcement officers will do as well. And so this is the one that is new. So that's all in there. Are there other questions or concerns from anyone on the call about huddles? Maybe you haven't tried them yet, or
I don't know if this is, sorry, I don't know if this is like a concern, and maybe I could better use this kind of gap in time to do some of that paperwork, or to do some of those calls to pediatrics office. But one of the things that I have run into at times, I think psychologically I get ready to go, and then I call VSP for support, and they're like, oh, it's shift change. So, and people are working from home, understandably, all things out of people's control. But then they're like, oh yeah, well, someone will be available at like 5:30. And so sometimes I think maybe I could just address that in the huddle though. But sometimes you can get ready to go and then you're like, oh, now I gotta wait and things are getting later, or you're worried about, like, I can think of a time that, we had an older youth and getting kind of antsy and not knowing where people are going to be at. And that they're like, at this place right now. And and I know that you can't control everything and make everything seamless and perfect, but I do think that has been just a barrier for me. Sometimes that gap in, like, we 4:30, we've got the ECO, we're ready to go. And then we're like, oh, it's going to be like another hour. So that's just been something that's been hard sometimes.
And that's in particular, that's the time sequence with the police. Yeah.
With Vermont State Police, because there's the shift change.
Yeah. Have any districts kind of figured that out? Like, how do you work around the shift change?
Yeah, we've done some hard work with our local law enforcement, in particular around the shift change. And when we start writing an affidavit or know that we're almost ready to submit it, we call them, and we've been able to work out in most cases where the chief will agree to hold someone over as long as they have the heads up. And fortunately, we've been able to build that relationship to do that, because otherwise it was also like, are you kidding me? You didn't just find out about, like, it went kind of both ways. And so it allowed for some common ground.
Yeah, I think, Alyssa, your example is a really good example of, why planning ahead really can make a difference in these kinds of scenarios. And as we learn these bits of detail and feed them back in so that next time we plan ahead even better, it just gets better and better. We're at 3:00. I'm happy to keep this discussion open. I know people have to leave and it's Friday. So I'm at least gonna put this in the chat. So this is the link to the survey. I will also email it out to folks later. So if it doesn't happen now, but this is the link to the survey, the name of the training, the date, and my name for the satisfaction survey. But are there other questions or concerns?
I don't have a concern or a question, but I would invite people, and I feel pretty confident that the team in Barry would agree with me. If folks are thinking about trying these and you want to see one, I know you just witnessed Alex and her team do one on video. It's a little different for us, but I would invite people, if you're interested, to let me know, and we could invite you so you could observe one of our huddles. They're not perfect. We're human beings. And it might be easier for people to actually view a huddle during this virtual time, but I would just invite people, if you want to do that, to reach out to any one of us.
Great, Deb. So just kind of send an email ahead of time, and then it would be like, well, the next huddle will let you know, kind of thing.
Yeah, we'll put it on our agenda and sort of make sure
That's
people
great.
get the invite.
Yeah, and I know that
Have one next week.
Yeah.
We
Okay.
think maybe.
We think.
Yeah, and I know that in general, the members of the safety culture work group have said similarly, if you want to join one of our huddles to see, if you want to invite one of us to facilitate one of your huddles, we can do that. If you want to talk, just in general about them, we can talk through that process with you as well. So anyone on the safety culture work group could be a point person for people if you want more resources. What else? Not enough time. My apologies. Shannon, anything from your perspective on kind of looping in, like, consultants, other folks, central office folks, or CIS or anything like that you've encountered?
Yeah, absolutely. I know that, I'm pulled into huddles frequently, and happy to be as frequently a member as is helpful for folks.
Yeah.
And I know DV consult or specialists are as well. And I don't know if that Nancy would be on the removal portion, but obviously the staffings before and consults before. But I think that those of us who work out of central office are here to support the districts, and so please feel free to utilize us.
Yeah, and I don't know if Diane's on this call, but I think Diane has said similarly, if there's any chance that emergency services are going to be involved, they would much rather be a part of the huddle to know the whole thing right from the beginning, and that they may often call huddles as well. if you're getting called called out by CIS on the weekend or something like that, that they may initiate a huddle to help support you with that process as well. So I know CIS is working to buy into this along with the rest of us. Okay. Any last questions or comments that people would like to add? What did I miss on my slide set? So I have possible implementation steps. So what I would recommend for this, and then we can wrap it at this, is this stuff right here. I would say take a look at the guidance and the checklists that are on SharePoint. And then the leadership team in a district should just discuss it, and they should sort out their questions first. And if they want to, before they present it to all staff, they can reach out to anyone on the safety culture work group, and we can try to help, answer questions. And then leadership team presents it to all staff. And what we've found works, I think this is what Deb was talking about, just start small. Just make a plan to use a huddle for the next removal, and then to review that with a 3 Ws afterward and see how it was, and then make your next decision after you've done that. And so if there's a district that hasn't implemented these and wants to try, I think it can be as simple as this process right here. Okay. Thank you all for joining us. Thank you for the fabulous work you do. I hope you have a nice weekend out there. What else? And come up with jokes for next time. I need more jokes. All right.
Thanks, Pete.
Thanks,
You're
Pete.
welcome, guys. You're welcome.
Have a good weekend.
Thanks. You too.
Bye.